What's up? This is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. And today we are going to have a hard conversation with a white guy. Black Asian guy having a hard conversation with a white guy. That white guy happens to be Ben Pfister. Ben, introduce yourself.
Jeff, thank you for having me. My name is Ben, and I've never really identified myself as the white guy, but I appreciate, filling that role for you today. Um, I I've been working with Jeff for the last, 12 years. I've been a teacher my whole life. I started as I studied art in school and went on to teach art and coach basketball for many years until I found this wonderful job working with Jeff at a company called Playwell and teaching engineering and all kinds of things using Lego. And that has been my life. I have a wonderful family with a wife and two kids and live in Ventura, California. And I'm really grateful to be having this conversation with you today. So,
All right, sweet. So let's get into this. What is it like? And I'm sorry, but I'm referencing you as the white guys.
okay,
That's
okay.
what we're doing. What is it like being a white guy during this time?
It's a hard time to be through, and so to sort out, specifically being white during that time, I have to kind of think through that. It is, I think that, and forgive me if I just think through some of this stuff as we
Do it.
go, because it's very tough. I think that I am very hopeful that a lot of this is coming out right now. Things that are um, that have existed all the way through, but people kind of denied that they existed, or tried to label them away and say things are done. And I think that there's something very healthy about the fact that it is that some of this is coming out. um, I It's incredibly sad. In terms of figuring out my role in this, I think it's a lot of to listening to people and figuring out the best way that I can act and what I'm putting back into this world, and really thinking about that. Um, there's the immediate kind of resistance and protests and things, and how you take part or don't take part in that. But then there's this bigger picture of this world where there are a lot of problems, and I just have to really keep reflecting on my own self and how these things are playing out in my own head, unconsciously and consciously, trying to have hard conversations like this to give words to these hard things so that I can reflect, and then figuring out action about what I'm doing and what I'm putting into this world, and do I feel good about that? Does it
Right.
feel like it's right for me? So
Yeah. We were talking about earlier, before we hopped on this, that, a lot of times we use terms and we don't define those terms beforehand. And especially when it comes to something as something like privilege. So us both being men, we have a certain level of male privilege. What does that mean? At least what that means to me is that I have benefited in many ways simply because of my gender, and many times that I haven't even noticed that I benefited. And it would even be hard for me to look back and see in those ways. But am I continuing, as someone that has male privilege, am I continuing to perpetuate that, or stepping aside so that other people, that, other genders, whether it's trans or whether that's female, are able to step into powerful roles that I have been taking up space in. So, how would you define like white privilege and like your privilege?
how would I define it? I think that there is a, you know, a deep rooted, you know, power structure that's been established for since, you know, since this country's been established, that has set up a hierarchy that is entrenched, you know, so deeply economically and just in our psyches, that you can kind of on the surface, whether it's through laws or, you know, things like that, you can try to do things and make things seem equal. But even when those things are established, there are other movements going on
Mm,
that you can't, that are hard to measure, um, movements that pass through generations, that there's a connectivity of people where you think, well, it wasn't me, it stops here, like I didn't do those things. But there's a continuity of of mindsets and of privilege that can carry through generations. And so I think it's understanding that it's not about putting the parentheses around you and your life and what you've done, but understanding that there are things that you've been given that you may not be aware of, that just by how you look or
mm,
by who your family was and how people see you or see your family. And um and it happens all the time.
yeah.
And I think it's very easy being in a position of being a white male to say, well, people are looking at me and they're judging me on my, you know, on the work I do or who I am. But I think it's hard because you don't want to knock yourself and say, oh, it's because I'm white and male. But there is a lot of that going on, and I know that, and it's hard to remember. Um,
So that brings up a good point that I've always brought up. If I was somebody that was in a position of power and I believed the story that I got into college because I was super smart, I got the first job because I'm a genius, or and not because I was white, because I was male, because I went to the same frat as this other person, because I looked like the person that hired me. Like, why would someone that is a white man in a position of power ever acknowledge that privilege? Because wouldn't that then destroy the whole story of how they got there?
exactly. Exactly. I mean, it undercuts everything your ego and everything stands on. And so by saying it's the same thing our country is going through, you know,
That's true.
we don't want to say what this country is really built on and what it's
That
really
is
standing on,
true.
because then all of these values, and it's like when you see somebody and people say, oh, you know, somebody who did a horrible thing or a horrible, you know, act of hatred towards somebody, and you're saying, well, look at all the good things they did. It's like you can be both. America could have been a land of opportunity, but it could also have been built on slave labor and of what we did to Native Americans. It
Yes,
can be both.
preach.
It can be, you know, my grandparents were immigrants and they came here fleeing from World War II and helping people escape Hitler. And so to them, this land was an amazing, it was a place that saved them and that gave them
Mhm.
safety. Now it can be that, and then sometimes when we talk about these things with my dad or with my, you know, with my family, saying things about what America is really resting on, it's that thing about talking about something and not understanding what they are connecting with it.
Mm,
If you say, well, you know, that this land was built on the decimation of a people and on the backs of this labor, of slave labor, then and then they're coming about it with knowing that their parents fled and came to this country and it gave them opportunity. It is both. It
yeah,
doesn't, it's not like one negates the other,
right,
and you can't talk about one without talking about the other.
right.
And that's a hard place to be. And it's the same with being a person. You can say, I can say that I got to where I am because I'm a hard worker and because I was, you know, fortunate to have a wonderful family. But I cannot deny the fact that I look like I do, and I have, you know, the things that come with that. And it is hard to remember that. I remember one thing that one time I was fortunate enough when I was studying art, I took a feminism class, and I remember we studied, you know, a lot of things and read a lot of things. And one of my teachers sometimes they told a story of this of a student they had where they basically said just the way he came in, he was a very he'd studied and knew all these things, but he unconsciously just came into a room and filled that room and just was a very, you know, guy. And they said, just do me a favor and imagine when you come into a room or you talk in a certain way, just imagine if you were a woman talking like that about how sitting like you sit and taking up the
Hmm.
space and, you know, and how that would be. And it was just that one thing of just do that favor for me for a week. And it like, and just thinking about that lesson they gave him, and it's a really hard thing. And I know you can never really do that. You can never really be in someone's shoes like that. But the things you don't realize, how you come into a room, how you dominate a conversation, you know, thinking like, you know,
Yeah, how you show up, like how much room are you taking up, you know, what voices are you reducing so that you can speak and, you know, fulfill your ego. It's interesting when you mentioned the America story. I think of like it's the Rockefeller story, right, where like now people see him, and or maybe people see him in this heroic way, but this was a billionaire that exploited people so he could get rich. The same thing with Steve Jobs, you know, with, you know, the fact that like all iPhones were built by poor people in other countries and we benefit from that, right? But what we see or what is presented to us is this lone figure that is just like I did it and I did it all by myself. And that's kind of what America is like, where we're like we're number one, and we're number one because we just worked really hard. And it's like, no, dude, you built this off the backs of so many people: slaves, indentured servants, immigrant populations rotating one after another, from the Italians to the Irish, the Chinese, Japanese. You know, so it's hard for someone to embrace both of those truths of like, you know, there are good things America's done, and there's a ton of horrible things that it's done. And how can one embrace both of those at the same time? So then this comes up for me is like, you know, being that you're like in an interracial marriage and your kids are biracial, how do you talk to them as well as talk to your wife about this?
well, you I mean, I'm grateful that we are forced to talk about it. We have to talk about it. You can't, you know, we talk about how it with the kids. Um, you know, I'm very clear with what happens, with what the, you know, I have to, even though they're young, they're in kindergarten and first grade. I want to tell them um, the truth about these things, and that there were policemen that did these things to people, and this is why. And it's
So
really hard.
what do you walk me through? What is that conversation like? What do you actually say, and what have they said back?
Well, I mean, what happens is they, you know, they hear stuff. They hear stuff that happens, and they're like, "Oh, wasn't there something that, you know, something that happened?" And they heard maybe a filtered down story of something, and then we have to sit and talk to them about it. And um, I think that we've got to just balance the being direct and clear with them um, about what really happened, but without and kind of instill enough.
Like what? How did you describe? Like what did they ask you? What was the exact questions they asked you, and then how did you answer them?
Well, they asked, you know, it's a hard thing because as a kid, police are good. They're, you
Right,
know, firefighters, they're good. They
right.
protect you. And so we had to be very clear in kid talk that you know, killed they killed somebody, and that they killed this man, and that, you know, the reasons were, and we talked about the skin color, and that because he was black. and that this police officer was a bad guy. They get very we I read this book. It was a kid's book with them about Jackie Robinson, and it was filtered down. It was kind of like the white people were saying in the saying, say, we don't want you to play here. And we kind of talked about that, and about the race there, and they're, trying to figure it out, and they're saying, well, my daughter will then go and draw, and she will play with my son, play these things out. And my wife heard him talking the other day about, like, they had like a dark skinned and a light skinned toy they were playing with, and they were basically saying, you can't play with us, and kind of making it sound like the black guy couldn't play because he didn't belong. And then we're like, we didn't really clarify the fact that those white people were hateful, and they were bad in this way,
Mm,
and that he was good. It wasn't just like, um you don't belong with us, because I think as a kid they deal with this, they just want to belong, and
right.
they are fighting not to be that person, on the person that's left out. They don't want to be that person left out.
Yep.
So they're kind of like trying to figure out, how can I not be that person that someone doesn't want to play with.
Hmm.
um my daughter, even we heard her say to my son, like, um I Otto, I'm darker than you. Do you think that they would have not let me play, and they would have let you play? I mean, we hear them talk about these
Wow.
things. And so they're working through it. Um, it's amazing how at such a young age, especially my daughter, is very aware of that, and of her skin being a little darker than other kids, and all the princesses and things that are out there, in unconsciously just affecting what these ideas are at a preschool. I mean, this is not like, this starts before anything, right? And her being self-conscious and thinking about that stuff. And so I think it's like about fighting that, like, not wanting to be the person left out. Is she not liking her skin color? My
Right.
son not liking his curly hair?
Right.
Is that, and it's like working through that with them, and their desire to belong, um, and understand this whole thing.
When you're talking to them, what is it that you felt you said that you think has resonated? Or are you still trying to figure that out?
I'm always trying to figure it out. We always are. I think we're trying to keep an open dialogue, most importantly, so that they can keep talking about these things. And when they say something that feels charged or really, racist, I mean, if the
Hmm.
kids say something like certain things,
Yeah.
that we try to not, like, jump on them. We just are trying to talk through it with them. Um, it's hard because you know, we live in a place that does not have a lot of African American population. And so, you know, my kids see their grandpa, and then they go around town and they're like, "Oh, that's grandpa." We're like, "No." Like, we need to, it's hard for us because we don't live close to a lot of family. And they're not exposed to as many different races as we would like. And so we're trying to figure out how to expose them to more things. And
Do you ever feel as if in your life, did you ever feel like a minority in any stage of your life where you weren't part of the majority but part of the minority?
well, again, defining things, right? Like, even
Right.
when you're in the minority, it's a different thing. You can't just say, I'm the only white guy at this thing and now I'm a minority. It's not the same thing.
Right.
At least in that definition, I feel like, I even though I'm the white guy in this conversation, my mom is part Hawaiian. I've got a lot of my family is from there, and I've got a lot of that. And I think that growing up, it was an interesting thing to examine that and have a um to know that my mom, my grandma, and they were from there and they're native Hawaiian, but that I don't look like that, and that
Mhm.
from the surface it doesn't seem like that, but then it's also coming to terms with that mix, that you are not just a white guy, but you are these other things, but also, the racist thoughts you have in your own head of
Yeah,
like,
dude.
oh, I want to be this, or I want to be that, or I want people to know this, or whatever. And it's like, you even the fact that my grandmother gave me a Hawaiian name when I was young, I'm like, why isn't that on my birth certificate? And they're
Yeah.
like, she gave it to you at your christening. Like, that's just what it is. And I kind of wanted that as a label. And it was like, you struggle with that internally, with like, I don't want to be just pigeonholed as this thing. And that's
Mhm.
and that is someone talking about a role of privilege, which is a
Mhm.
horrible thing to have experienced, and going back and living in Hawaii for 10 years and experiencing that you're on the inside and the outside of
Mhm.
those things. Now, I can never say I wouldn't ever say I really know what it's like to be a minority in that way. But in a, I think with our understanding of the definition of minority, but just my own personal struggle with my own family history and ethnicity, and how that's been defined, and um, basically embracing all of it and not figuring that out. And so, but yeah, I've been in places where I've been the only this or the only that. I mean, I've been in, like, and I figure it out, and I come to terms with it, but I don't think you can compare it because of the
Right,
dynamic of
right.
our culture.
Yeah, I think about when I was a kid. So my mom's Filipino, my dad is from the Caribbean. So I'm Blasian, black and Asian, and I always felt as if whenever we went back to those countries, I didn't belong,
Yeah,
right? Because I was from America. But when I was at school, I definitely didn't belong. And there wasn't such thing as a black Asian person. That wasn't very. There weren't a lot of people like myself at my school.
yeah,
So tying into what you said earlier about like kids just want to belong, is I remember trying to pretend sometimes, trying to pretend to be white. At one point, being Latino was cool, so then I pretended to be Latino. Like this is what I felt like I had to do in seventh and eighth grade, almost to a point that like one of my friends would give me the nickname like the chameleon because I could kind of mix through with well whatever race you want, I can give it to you. Which like really frustrated me when I went to college and then realized that I had like my own like internal racism that I was like struggling with, right?
yeah,
And that I was blatantly denying myself, of who I was for a really long time, all the way to like preschool when um, some kid lifted up a crayon. It was like a black crayon. It was like, look at this black crayon. And then someone else was like, Jeff is black. And then I stood up and I was like, I'm not black, I'm brown. Like I even when I was 3, did I realize like, hey, wait, I'm closer to y'all. And
yeah,
yeah, and then having to like reconcile that was just so frustrating that I then in college turned to so much anger towards um like white people in general. Like I went through my I hate whitey phase, as many people of color do, because I was just like I needed to channel it somewhere because I didn't want to channel it towards myself.
yeah. And it was I feel that, and I've been in, like, it's a horrible thing because um in Hawaii, I had a lot of friends and family that would be really racist to white people, and like, and understandably, like, white people took our this and that, and me, like, I part of me, the racist part of me, felt good to be included in that, because then I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, now I'm not included in this or that, I'm part of you guys. But
Right.
also then I'm thinking, that's crazy, like, now I'm, it's just this, it was a very hard time of belonging and not belonging, and reflecting on kind of this mixed identity that you are. And I think that it's hard, like with my kids, going back to my kids, talking about this, like you know, you don't want to even point out that there are these, like, even the term black, like, and saying these things, because then you're like, oh, grandpa's black, and they're like, no, he's brown, and then you try to explain all this, and then all of a sudden they are starting to like make these walls in their head and these
Yep.
labels and these
Yep.
things. But you kind of have to, because that is the world we're in, and
Right.
you have to build it up so you can then break it down, or teach them that it's, yes, that's the terms and that's what it is, and that there are these things going on, but here's how you navigate that. You can't just kind of put a bubble over them. But it's hard to know how to do that the right way. um,
Yeah.
and so much of it is reflecting on your own self, because I think that when you teach other kids or your own kids and you try to do what's right, you any unconscious things that you haven't resolved inside, you're going to project that.
Dude.
And it
Oh,
will
you're speaking the
happen. And
truth.
so, and that's why it all starts with, like, with all this stuff, and again, I think it's really important to read about the history and understand all these things, and understand, the history of America and all these things. But at the same time, understanding that all these workings are in your head, like all this whole world, and all of its walls and boundaries and definitions comes from people's heads. So all these battles are going on in your own head, and all these definitions and, conflicts. And so if you can take the time to sort through that, it can be a really hard thing. But then that's the only hope that you can, when you go out into the world, hopefully put some good stuff out there. But
Right. There's yeah, I'm struggling with this. I'm putting together this video about the how racist the police like system not only has been, but it's rooted in slavery patrols. Like that's how it began. And as I'm putting it together, I've always found a hard discussion that happens between individualism and collectivism, where the individual argument will be like, "Whoa, they're good cops out there, they're good people," or I'm not, or someone makes it individual to themselves. I'm not a racist. Like I heard that from this guy doing the overcome racism organization, and he was just like, white people always come up to me, and they really what they're looking to say, not even ask me questions as much as to say, I'm not racist. Can you confirm that I'm not a racist? Can you throw your magic wand and tell me I'm not? Okay, thank goodness. All right, we just wanted to get that out of the way. And then it defeats having the bigger conversation, which is this system it's set up in this certain way, um, that obviously benefits a certain society, a white supremacist society, where the way in which I define that is that it benefits a white person over any other person of color. It's like, how do we ensure we have the bigger conversation and not allow ourselves to just have that individual conversation that stifles any level of growth?
it's a huge question. I I I don't know. I think that it starts with reflecting on ego, on that, that you are this identity of this person who is good or bad or racist or not racist, and it's like you have to defend that, and that it's simple, and that this is what it is. Same with our country that we've been talking about. And I think the only way you can really examine the complexities, and even really good people examining how you can have these thoughts that are racist, and
Mm-hmm.
are, that you can still be a good person with good intentions, who's reflecting on how they are racist and how they are not perfect, and how it's a process of working on things and understanding. It's not like a, you know a binary thing where
Not a
you are
binary,
either
yeah.
this or that. And understandably, racism, it's a very charged word. And so I think it's also really re-looking at the definition of what that is. Um, is it connected with hatred, or is it not? Is it just a prejudice based on race? And so it's like, and there's a lot of these things, is it an understanding that one race is better than another? Is that connected to it? Or is it just literally, I see a person and I make an assumption on that person based on what I understand about their race, however ignorant that um, is that racist? Or is it only if it's connected with hatred or a dynamic where you that is connected with something being better than something else?
Right,
So
like
it's
a
like
power.
having that conversation about what that even means, and that you can have these thoughts and you could be working towards something good, but you can always be working through this process of reflecting on, your own way of looking at the world.
So
um
so then addressing like unconscious bias, like you've seen the Jane Elliott blue eyes brown eyes thing, right? um and tying that into play, she actually used play to create this power structure where brown-eyed kids thought they were better than blue-eyed kids for an entire day, and then blue-eyed kids thought they were better than brown-eyed kids, and treated each other in such horrible ways. And these were like really great kids that kind of liked each other just a day ago. So knowing that she used that play method, how do we address having these hard conversations about race, privilege, white supremacy, white fragility, all that stuff in a play oriented like framework?
it's a huge thing. I think a lot of it comes from the game maker really understanding the dynamic and what and some of the dynamic of what situation you like, what kind of conflicts you want to put people in and what kind of environment to allow them to understand something. And and I think because that will you will set the parameters of what the game is and who's this and who's that and how the whole thing will work, and that will help nudge the outcome and the understanding that hopefully people come from it. So it is, you can work through it backwards, like thinking, and we talked about this before, what is the outcome, the understanding that I want them to get? What are some of the conflicts or restrictions, or how can I set up something to hopefully have them confront some of those things and see how they deal with it? Um, and then a lot of it is reflection. It's like giving them the space to really think about what happened, like what was that, and what are the implications if you deal with this in this way. Do you see how that's the same as this and this?
Mm.
And making those connections. And kids sometimes can make those connections. I think they can, if they experience something and you're like, remember how you felt when this, and then do you want to, is that what you want to do here? And then they're like, oh yeah. So I think that there's something to those little simulations, right, that can um, that can really help. But again, I always am, I'm interested in those things because it's also like you can do these things, you can pretend to be on this side of it, but when you come out of it, you can go back.
No, you can
Like
go back.
other people, it is not a game. It's
Right,
not, the life is not a game. You don't
right,
get to take this off, right? And
right.
so there's something where it's like, yeah, it's good and it can be helpful, but can it translate into real life? And you come out of it and you're like, oh yeah, now I went through that and now I understand. But you're still
You're like,
wearing
I
you're
understand
still
this much. Yeah,
and you're still wearing all that privilege. You're wearing it.
exactly.
You can think you have this understanding and you can just kind of like turn a blind eye to the
That's
yes you got and the no they got, and say, I'm still putting non-racial, I'm fighting racism in the world, but you're still riding that wave unconsciously.
when you saw her exercise with those kids that were in like I think second and third grade, and then she eventually did this with educators. Would you be comfortable having your kids go through that exercise at their school?
Yeah, I mean,
Like, I've shown this to other people and they're like, oh, we could never do that now at schools.
oh no, I would, but a big thing um, is who is doing it. I feel
Mm,
like that makes a difference to me. I feel
mm,
like something this charged, you need to have somebody who is running it, who really does. This is not like a curriculum, I think, that you just give any old teacher to run it how they want.
right,
Because if you don't do it in the right way with the right subtleties, it could backfire
right.
seriously, and they could come away just feeling, so I think that it's understanding what the kids can handle. I actually honestly have not seen the full one with the kids. I've seen some of her later ones with
Oh,
adults.
the full one with the kids is
So
fascinating.
I actually have to go back and see that myself. But
Yeah.
um
Though you've seen the one with the educators where she just like kicks them out when they
yeah,
and what I loved about it, not to go too far into it, but what I loved about so she takes these educators, she puts these collars on them, and anyone that's wearing a collar, she treats them like trash, right? And she tells the other group beforehand that isn't wearing collars, hey, also remember you are in a position of power, so you need to back me up in this. So at least the one that I saw, she doesn't let the people with their green collars come in for like 20 minutes.
right,
And it
right.
makes them so pissed off because they're like, what's happening in there? And then
Yeah,
they finally come in. And as soon as they come in, she's like, you're late. You're late. Why are you so late? Because you're late, you got to sit in the back. And there might not be enough chairs for you. So some of you have to stand. And like that, she just sets the tone in this power dynamic. And then what I loved about that one part was then someone kept raising her hand that had one of the green collars on, and she's like, "If you're asking questions or you want to say something, you are not listening, and I don't want to hear you because you're speaking from a position of privilege, and you don't get that privilege." And it made this person with the green collar so angry, she storms off, and then comes back and has taken the collar off. And then she wants to sit in there. The woman's like, nope, you can't come back in. Jane Allen's like, you can't because not everyone else can just leave and throw away their race. So just to give context of that scenario. So when you saw that, what did you think?
well, I think it was very to me, it was very interesting to see how the people of color dealt with it and accepted this game and said, I'm game, we're going to try this thing. And especially with the adults, how the white people going in, as soon as they were on this side, they're like, this is not okay. I don't know, but they
The
were like,
Karens in the
I
chat.
am not that. They
Right.
immediately, even playing the game in this role, they felt like, I can't do that. And so it's like, it's just not suspending your own, like, just like ability to just play and see and acknowledge that maybe you have something to learn, maybe you don't know. And it was and they would kind of storm off like they were going to be a hero, saying, I don't agree with this, I don't like the way you're talking to me, I am not going to play a game like this, I'm leaving. And thinking that they're going to leave, and with everybody saying, oh, what a hero, they didn't want to do this, instead of understanding the bigger picture of the role that the role of this, and seeing the different dynamic was very interesting, and how that action, that somebody could think I am being, you know, politically correct and I'm doing the right thing, but really what you're doing is not understanding kind of what is going on, and not
Right.
being willing to open yourself up to, like, uh participating in those hard questions, and accepting that you just maybe don't know. I think you have to always be in that position where, like, I don't, you know, I know that I've, even if I'm trying to be aware of this, that have gotten a ton from my race and from my the benefit of that I'm not even aware of, or maybe I subconsciously and don't want to look at, but
But you know
you
what?
know
I even realized why we get along or we've always gotten along is I've never felt any level of entitlement from you, which is rare because I usually feel a certain level of entitlement when I'm around white men in particular. Some white women as well, but most of the time with white men. And there's something about it. Why do you think you're able to check that level of privilege, or at least recognize that or check that entitlement in some ways? Or do you not even realize it?
I don't know if I do. I think, the only thing I can think of is personally, I had, uh, you know, a weird experience in high school where I was very shy and I had something kind of wrong with my voice. I had like literally as I was growing up and going through puberty or whatever, I had like a really kind of scratchy, kind of highish voice, but I couldn't like talk loudly and I was very self-conscious of it to the point where, I experienced just like out of my skin anxiety if our teacher just asked us to read in a circle. And so it was something that I don't think I realized the effect of it. Then things kind of fell into place and I got my voice and everything. But like I went through years on top of just being kind of a shy person of having this thing where I was just petrified and I never talked about it or really faced it. And I think that that gave me like a crazy, you know, to think then that I would go into teaching. But I think then I had a radar for if you are picking on this kid or because of anything, like I am going to defend that kid. Like I feel that kid retracting right now because I know that. And so I think that was weirdly a gift that I went through this, and all kids that time is impossible. But for me, it was really intense and it was a struggle to come out of. And I think it affected me in a lot of ways that I don't think I realized. And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, a lot of it is and then my family, just being raised with the family I've had and having some other races in my family and understanding that and hearing stories about my grandmother being Hawaiian and not and not wanting to identify as being Hawaiian because back then it was not the thing. You didn't want to be darker, you didn't want to look and be in the sun. And hearing those stories and understanding some of that from however I could. And then my parents, my grandparents on my dad's side, they were white, they were immigrants, and they hearing the stories of them and what they did to risk their lives to fight against Hitler. And I'm like, I am standing on all that. And that's a lot of responsibility. I'm pretty darn lucky I'm even here. And so it's just a mix of all this shit. So I don't know.
So then a question that comes up is, can you teach like that level of empathy? Can somebody that is in a position of power and privilege really understand the pain that a lot of Black people and other people of color have gone through? Or is that just not doable? And I'm not talking about sympathy, I'm talking about like empathy, like,
I don't know. I don't know if people are kind of equipped to do that unless you go through some kind of
mm,
like urgent, not trauma, but something that just gets you upside the head, and it might hit people in different ways and different triggers. But I don't know if it's something. Maybe some of these games or situations could do it a little bit, but I think that people in a way have to be at some level open and ready for it, and then they need that stimulus from the outside world, that right teacher or that right situation to like give them that aha moment. But if they're
yeah.
not in a place where they are even open to it and saying, well, I don't really know and I have some stuff to learn and I'm figuring this out. If you're not in that place, I don't know how you can shock somebody
Yeah, I
about
mean,
it.
I was having a conversation the other day with a group of people, and there was this one woman, a white woman, who kept speaking up and saying that she was an ally, and it was like, I'm here, I'm ready to listen, and then she would talk for a long period of time, and then it's like, and then she'd go back to being like, I'm here, I'm an ally, and I was like, I don't know if you are. And the other part that I was thinking was, I was like, I also don't know if you know what you're agreeing to, because to be an ally, you also have to give up a certain level of power. And I think that's a part that I think a lot of people don't realize. In order for change to happen, it isn't like black people and other people of color have been like, we just haven't been talking about it, but now we're talking about it. Now we're addressing it. This is like, y'all, we've been talking about it forever. It's you that are in the position of power that are not getting out of the way or stepping, bringing other people to the table, I guess. I don't even like that term.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like, in order for things to actually drastically change, not only does the system have to change, but you yourself have to give up a certain level of privilege and power in order for others to step up. Do you really want to do that? And do you understand what that actually means? Because I don't think a lot of people realize what that actually means. What is your take?
I think I mean, I totally agree. I think it's easy to kind of say these things, but you don't realize that you're saying it from this perch. And so it's like, well, and I don't think it's always clear on how, I don't think people necessarily know how that dynamic would work. How do I step away and make space? But just being aware that that has to happen is at least a start, that it's not just about, your words and your this or your that, and then you go back to your thing. It's like, no,
Right.
there's got to be a fundamental change, and that it's not just about, you know, your badge that you're wearing or your this or your that. It's like all the way how you're living your life, and what kind of space you're making for people. Um and I don't know that. Like, I personally, I don't I don't know. I know that, like, all I can do is say, well, with the privilege that I have, try to keep asking these questions and having these conversations and reflecting on my own outlook and my own racism and things like that, and doing the best I can to keep asking those questions and do the best that I can in the work that I do that honors my people before me that did what they did. And hopefully,
Ooh, can we talk about one thing that you did, not in too much detail, but just a little? Can you describe this one way in which you taught these students about the Trail of Tears? Because that is a powerful educational moment. One of the most powerful educational moments I've heard um, that you have done.
yeah, I mean, teaching, I was teaching with Lego. We were teaching history, American history, and it was US history. And so, obviously I hadn't really taught history before, but I had been aware of all of this stuff, especially with my Hawaiian ancestors, and understanding how that all has gone down and how it's very much similar with Native Americans. And so I wanted to have the kids understand the Trail of Tears and do a lesson on that, but not, it's always hard to know when you do a lesson and you're making something, what you make. And are you making an illustration of something? Like, what is the thing you're making in that process like? So I gave them, we talked about it first, and I tried to tell about you know, the story of it, um, and what happened. And then I was a little not sure how this would fly, but I said, we are going to um, basically honor those 4,000 or however many it was, Cherokee and Native Americans that died on that. Like, I wanted them to know, to feel that number, and to, like, because these numbers are thrown out there. And Ta-Nehisi Coates talks a lot about, like, really feeling that you hear someone died, but you understand and I don't want to speak for him. I don't know if I've read enough to speak on this, but it's something that struck me that I heard him talk about, was feeling that every body that was killed was a body that was somebody's baby and that grew up, and the investment you give in that body, and that it was physically destroyed. And like, feeling that, instead of like 4,000 people died, And so of course I didn't really have this conversation with the kids, but what we did is we basically had like a quiet meditative build where we took these little bricks and we slowly we counted, we did some math and figured out how many were on one that was this size, how many of these would take to be 4,000, and we just placed them down. And I said, don't think about pattern, don't think about anything, just place them down. And the only thing I'm going to ask is that it's quiet. And you think about what you want to think about. I try not to do too much. And they built. And it was literally putting little bricks down. And they were very, that kid mentality. They wanted to get to 4,000 so they could see it and know that they did that. And it was an attempt, in my own way to kind of have them reflect in their own way and reflect on the number of people, that 4,000, like what that looks like. um and some of the kids to this day, they've built all this crazy stuff with me, and they were like, that was my favorite project, you know
Wow.
and so it meant a lot. But it was when I felt myself in that situation of who I am, and I felt a responsibility to try something, but I didn't know if I'm doing this the right way. I didn't know how it would come across, but I
Why
didn't
did,
want to do an illustration of it,
right.
right?
Why do you think it was so powerful for them?
I I don't know. I think it might have been a mix. I don't remember how I presented it, but I remembered really, wanting them to feel what that was like. And then, and there's the aspect of the kids doing something and understanding that they could be doing something for a process, and that what's important is not that final product really. It's the doing of it. Is there's something special in that, in a simple act, and that it
Something
represented something.
sacred.
Maybe. And I tried not to make it, I'm like, I wanted to not make it too sacred unless they felt it. I wanted to say, I just need it to be quiet, and I
Mm.
need you to do this. You can go at whatever pace you want and think about what you want. But I tried not to make it too, so I don't know. And maybe, it was an interesting thing to think about. I still have a lot of those because it meant a lot to me, to the reaction that they had and the feeling of them doing it. There's something about the specialness of that quiet, and that I wanted them to think about that time that we don't usually build in that way with that kind of focus. So I don't know.
The reason why I asked that is because, like, when we were talking about empathy earlier, like, that is a moment where they might have felt that. And even if they only did that for 40 minutes or so, um, it was ingrained in them to the point that they reference to it to this day.
Mhm.
And I guess that's what gives me some hope is, I see play as my tool, but I feel like it's one strong method that, we can bring each other together and actually save us. The world's going to be fine, but humans won't. But if we are to really come together, then we have to figure out how to play the way in which kids play. Like, we have to come back to that moment, and I have hope that there are still ways people can actually understand or feel somebody else's experience, even if just for a moment, so that they're more likely to support, you know, this movement or support protest and actually show up and put their bodies on the line as well.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you think play can, I don't know, be used at this time to have these hard conversations?
I think it can loosen things up. It can loosen up, put expectations on their heads, and allow you to ask questions in a way that you don't feel like you're being judged, maybe, and hopefully reflect on things in a different way. I think that play, you're going into another world, so um, you also, if you play really the right way, you can dissolve a little bit. You can not worry so much about your worries, your personal worries, and you can, this thing that I'm doing or making is important. That's what is important. And even just understanding, whether it's through sports or art or building or playing a game, if you can kind of become dissolved into something else and let your things go a little bit, it's the start of it. I feel like, grooming, I think that people have to really do a lot of self work. I feel like before you can say, I'm going to help, I'm going to be an ally, I'm going to do this or that, you've got to really, you got to work on yourself. You got to look at the hard parts of yourself, and you have to see how you react in certain situations, and you have to be compassionate to yourself, but you also got to be real and not let things slide,
Yeah.
and keep asking those questions. And I think games and play has the potential to do that. Um, it has the potential to let people kind of work on something, and through working on something, loosen up maybe mentalities and views of the world that can have them feel a little bit more open and at peace with certain things. And then if you have that, then the other stuff kind of falls into place.
Right.
I think people worry too much about, what can I do? What can I show up to? What can I say on my page? And they're
Right.
like, do people see me like this? Do people see me like this? And it's like, dude, just shut up and like go sit down for a while. Like what is, how does this,
Uh,
you're saying all this stuff so that you're seen as this, but then you're really not living it. You're not really,
Oh
I don't
yeah, you
know.
bring up such a good point because I was listening to the racial justice educator. Her name's Dr. Amanda Kemp today, and she was talking about how, as like our racial justice facilitator, you almost have to go in with a clean slate. You cannot bring your own trauma or your own anger or your own bias, um, all that stuff into your workshops, as it will then affect and defeat you from achieving what you're trying to do at your workshops. And I see that a lot of times where people will be like, well, I had trauma and this person had trauma, so now we relate because my trauma is your trauma. And it's like, well, it's kind of the same. And it's like, no. And it's the part of like basically, and I was saying this the other day on a podcast, like, it's not about you, right? Like it's not about me either. It's about us. It's about like this bigger thing that's so much. It's the whole cathedral analogy of earlier of just like we're building this huge cathedral and you're probably not going to see it at the end of the day and you still build it. Well, look at my area and it's like, dude, calm down. It's not about you, dude. We're trying to build something that's bigger and better and our highest self. And for us to be being like, hey, but look at me right now is not the point.
It's really true. And even things like sports can give you some of that, to understand like the balance between being the superstar but being a part of a bigger body,
Right.
to learn really what it means to be a team, and like to understand that it is, there's a collective thing, and as part of that, you disappear in a way, but in a way you don't, because we're using your strengths, but it's not because of you, it's because you can then help this bigger thing move and be successful, right? And so it's this, and it's the same with kids. Like you want to draw out the strengths and the things that make them special, but also teach them, not about you. It's not like, don't let that go to your head. You're special, but you're not that special. It's like, no, but really it is a little bit like
It
that,
is a little bit like that.
where you want them, and as a teacher, you have to be ready to kind of knock down those egos, but also
Yeah.
raise up the kids who need it. And so you have this, balance of trying to, keep that thing in check. And in the same class, you might
Mm.
be saying nope, and you might be saying, I got you. And that's kind of, and even that person who you're saying I got you, later you might be saying a little bit of that. And it's like, and it's just because it's about understanding your own self-worth and what you can contribute, but understanding that it's a bigger thing than you, and that it's not, these things need to go through people and not like be about you and something to go on your resume or something so
Right.
that people look at you as being part of some cause. It's like
So,
if you really are in it. Go ahead, sorry.
oh yeah. So my final question, and this is a question that I've been asked, is being that you're the white guy on this, right? Um, for a lot of my friends that are people of color that don't feel they have faith that white men will ever give up their power and that things will not change. Um, they just won't change because that dude is not gonna give up. Yeah, their position of power and privilege. What do you say to someone that is feeling that way or doesn't feel like they have hope because none of the white men that they've seen in their lives have ever shown a certain level of checking their privilege, their power, or their entitlement?
I'm having a hard time believing that myself. I am in the same, I'm sorry, but I'm a little bit in the same boat where I don't think I have faith that it's going to happen. I'm not going to sit here on behalf of white men and say, "Don't worry, guys, not all of us are bad." I can't do that. I'm very skeptical, and I don't
So
know.
then, if you are very skeptical, what do you say to your kids when they're like, "Will
I
things
try to. What do I say to my kids about what?
about like that the world will get better, that we will heal this wound"?
I don't know. I try to have them every little thing, that little conflicts that they're playing out and them making sense of their world where they are. I'm trying as best as I can to in that moment have them have perspectives and feelings where they just are loving people.
Mm.
And I that's all I can do. And I feel like, if I can try to, you know, give some of that to my kids and maybe my students and let them see some of that and feel some of that, then maybe one person at a time you can kind of give them some of that, maybe, or at least plant a seed that maybe later it hits them. But I don't know. I don't have hope, really. I don't know. I don't. I'm sorry. I what I mean, again, that's another word we have to define. I feel like there is something very good and real. I really appreciate having this conversation with you and being able to kind of reflect on this with you. I love the process of figuring this out with my wife and having the discussions with her and figuring out how we can best school them in a way that sets them up, that teach, how can we teach history to them, how
Mm.
can we teach these things to them and not lie. And I don't know, but it's a fun process to figure out with her. um and maybe there is that hope that if they, that maybe this, if it's done in the right way, it radiates out somehow. um and it's like you've always been somebody who, um I feel like when I hear you talk about things like play or the value of what the company that we did, and you do these talks, I feel like it comes from your heart, and I'm like, yeah, I that comes out. And I can only hope that then, that helps me do that with other people, and that maybe that makes a difference. But I'm not about to speak on, I think that a lot of people are in a position where if they don't, they're going to hold on to what they've got until Armageddon, or until they are forced with something crazy. And even then, it's going to have to be stripped out of their hands. Like, and I am hoping that there can be baby steps in that way. And honestly, I'm really hopeful that I want things to be open. I think if you think about, like, I was lucky enough to do some art workshops in South Africa, and to see how at that time of apartheid and the Reconciliation Commission, that things were just out there. And as hard as it was, people were talking and telling the story. And, like, and I would prefer that than to have this undercurrent, like, we are going to help the world and we are America and racism is over and slavery was so long ago and I didn't own slaves and da da da. And then have this undercurrent that is there. And as much as we can say about our president, the scary thing is that there are this mass of people that support him and that feel these feelings. And so I'd almost rather have it be out in
Hope.
the open. Maybe there's a hope that things can change in some way, but um, I'm sorry. I don't know. That doesn't answer your question. I don't know
No,
if I
no,
can really
no,
give.
it does. It's real, man. It's real. It's. I guess it's not binary, right? There's a point of feeling, of wanting America to be what it should be. What is that Langston Hughes in a poem that he was saying? He was like, America is still trying to be what it's always like claimed to be. It's never got there. It's always talked about these ideals, but we've never been there. And his hope is that at some point we can get there. Um, but the reality is that it is really messed up, and there are people that are going to hold down this power until like they literally burn it down. Like they're going to burn stuff down as they're losing
Mhm.
their power. So, but that doesn't mean that like it's. I guess there's that audacity of still feeling hopeful that's really important. That even though there aren't many um, examples of us making progress, we have made some progress and we've had some wins. And this might be an inflection point where we make a little bit more progress, and it's worth putting in the work because maybe this might be the point where we tip the scales at some point.
Yeah. I still feel like, this becoming of America and progress moving forward, if you keep making progress and you don't look at what you're standing on, I don't know if you can get there. I
Yeah,
think you've got to really reflect on where we've been. And part of that becoming is not let's pass more laws and let's do more stuff as much as like let's accept what we
let's
did
accept what.
and let's accept what we're standing on and figure that out, because that I don't moving forward without that is just you've got a festering wound underneath.
That's
And you've got
true.
when people talk about this one movement of us making progress, and there I forget who it was, but I forget who it was. I saw somebody talk about how, yes, you talk about this kind of mass like progression, but at the same time, you've got this other movement of racism also evolving, and it's in parallel. As it maybe it's going underground, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
evolving and changing and going in parallel. So it's not like there's one track that we
Mm-hmm.
need to earn more points. It's like we've got to
Mm-hmm.
accept that there's this other thing that is not going
That's
it's
true.
and so it's kind of like, yeah, we
Like
can
if you
on
don't
some
deal with
level.
this, if you don't deal with this, regardless of where we go here, right?
And it's not as simple as like, how far have we come? It's like, well, we go other step, people or society have making steps, definitely, but then there's an undercurrent of evolution that is happening with hatred and racism, and that is also evolving and moving as well. Goes underground, rears its head, goes underground, evolves, changes. It's got its tendrils in everything. And then you've got this thing that we say it's our evolution as a society. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but there's all these things mixing together. And so
Like if
it's a
we
hard
don't address that festering wound of hate, then we won't be able to make actual progress.
what's hard is to address it in a way that's not hate against hate. It's
Yes.
like if we don't embrace the people who are like confused and ignorant and having a hard time with things, if we come at them, I mean, if people come at them in a combative way or an accusatory way or you're this and you're that, um, it is going to be very hard for them to be in a space where they can accept and reflect and
Well, it'll just
truly
confirm what
change.
they already believe,
Yeah,
and that we need to go to war. Right. Oh
yeah.
man, this was a good conversation. I feel like we've made some progress.
I feel I appreciate talking to you about it. It's a hard thing to think about, and even on my own reflection, like reflecting on being the white guy on this kind, this binary, at least the view of that being
Right.
this conversation is that I don't think I've really ever been that role in anything like this, but I appreciate it. I mean, I am thinking about a lot of these things and thinking about my kids. It really helps me to talk to you and hear these things moving so that I can kind of keep you know working forward. And it helps me to see what kind of work you're continuing to do, and in your own way doing things that are you, but also talking about the things that you care about, and that blending of those things, and just seeing what happens, not with a specific goal in mind, but just putting things out there. So it's very helpful to me. So
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate you. And hopefully we can have another one of these conversations. See you, everybody.
thank you.
All right, man. Now.